thank you all for staying with us here. And there's lots more information about the research that these people have been doing, the students, the faculty, and others that are available through our website. So for those of you who are visiting who are not familiar with that, you can find all kinds of information there, including electronic copies of dissertations, published reports, links to various laboratories and other research results for the faculty at those locations. We do not have dates yet for the next symposium, so the website will have those once we've settled on that. Part of that is getting the appropriate room arrangements here at the university. There's so many events going on, and being able to have the right rooms is important. Again, I'd like to note the wonderful contributions of the CERIAS staff who have put in a tremendous time and effort to help with registration, with the electronics, the AV, room management, registration, and so on. And to close out, we traditionally have a speaker who's got experience that sort of covers everything that we like to do in CERIAS and as a community. And this year we're very fortunate to have someone who has over 2 decades of experience working for the 4th largest U.S. I'll say bureaucracy, and it's not a bad word here, that the U.S. Treasury is one of the most important agencies within the U.S. government, and it is also one of the biggest targets because that's where all the money is. They also do a lot with security, not only protecting it, but they carry out policy. They supervise sanctions. They do tracing of cyber criminal transactions and help with international trafficking in individuals and drug trade and all kinds of things that might not be immediately obvious, but there's the old tradition in investigations as to look for the money. Where does the money flow? Well, Treasury is the place where they look for that. Our speaker, as I said, has over 2 decades rising into the senior executive service. Originally trained as a lawyer, working in the private industry, and then joining the government. He rose through the ranks, learned a lot of technology along the way, eventually becoming the Deputy Chief AI Officer for Treasury and the CTO for AI technology before retiring last year. Has won a number of awards, several of which are I'm not going to go through them, but they're listed in his biography. Brian's somebody that I've known for going back about 15 years now, at least, and his name would consistently come up whenever there was a meeting of federal officials who were interested in security issues. He was involved in activities of many different kinds because the forefront of electronic crime and security was often spotted at Treasury, and he was one of the lucky people to have to deal with that and deal with it effectively. He has a number of things that he's going to share with us now as someone who looks back on that career and that experience. And as I said, I'm really thrilled that Brian Peretti is here to share his experience with us today and to be able to answer some questions at the end. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mr. Brian Peretti.
Thank you very much. Am I on the clicker or you? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. Really appreciate it. And before I start, I really want to thank the whole CERIAS team, staff, Sean, Joel, on being able to make this happen. This is something that staff has been trying to get me to for many years, and every time there was some problem with Treasury being able to send me here. So not Treasury anymore, so now I can come. So I'm pretty excited about that. So thanks for having me here. Yeah. Whatever you need. This is why I'm not the tech guy. Thank you. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I guess, some of my background in this area and how cybersecurity and AI kind of interrelate, hopefully, into the future. I was excited about all the presentations today, but the most exciting part was when I was hearing about the gentleman who wrote his dissertation on beer. Before I joined Treasury, I was in a law firm, and I was responsible for beer law, which I had the opportunity to kind of really work on that, and really excited about other people who share that passion. Not necessarily the drinking of it, but just the technology behind it. And then I also did, during COVID, I was on detail over to DHS, and I worked on a lot of protein stuff. So I understand the portion that was being talked about of having to, when you have animals that you just can't have anymore, tied to other things, how we can kind of work on those issues. So that was a lot of my experiences came back to here. But I want, which way did I point? Back? You notice it's black and gold, right? I made it just that colors for Purdue. Although it's not really gold, it's kind of yellow. Sure. Well, I'll give you some background because there's a slide about me. So I retired from Treasury after about 23 years as their Chief Technology Officer and their Deputy Chief AI Officer. For the majority of that time, I was the director in an office called Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection. And in that space, I had worked on the public-private partnership. So being able to work with the financial sector, especially post 9/11, to figure out how to increase the resilience. Focused a lot on cyber, but also physical. So a lot of stories about hurricanes and other natural disasters. The only one I never worked on was lotuses. I was hoping that would happen, but I had volcanoes, so I was pretty excited there. But one of the things I was responsible for while I was in those positions was to create a report on how the financial services sector was using AI technology. So President Biden had issued an executive order in December 30th, 2023, that directed Treasury within 14 months to be able to create a report. And so we had to do a report trying to find out how the financial sector is using it, and what we could be doing to help them using going forward. A couple highlights from that report I just wanted to point out. One, we interviewed 42 different financial firms. We had 39 different definitions of AI, because we asked them, what do you consider AI? And we thought, wow, that's interesting, but everybody was looking at it differently from their own perspective, right? They didn't want to take our definition, and we didn't offer a definition, but we wanted to see how they used it. Another thing they always said was that we have current robust risk management frameworks, and we believe AI can be managed within those frameworks. I think today we're seeing some of those things coming about that are going to cause some challenges to those frameworks, and maybe even have to deploy additional frameworks or whole new areas that we are going to have to talk about. And I think that's where it's going to be exciting for everybody here to kind of work on these groundbreaking issues where we just don't have any preset knowledge on how to do that. Another area we found there was that there was not a lot of fight going on between government and the private sector. And that was really beneficial because they understood this was new technology, it's coming about, and what they wanted to do is work with the regulators and government to figure out how to be able to use it in the way they think they should be using it, as opposed to which government should be telling them to use it. And that's kind of percolated all the way through today, in which there's been some work streams that's come out of this effort. One was a creation of a lexicon that was created by the financial sector to be able to talk to and amongst themselves on how to be able to use the words within AI, in the AI space. That became very difficult in the beginning, as I said, 39 different definitions. At least there's some uniformity coming about, created by them, not by government, right? And so that kind of helps to be able to let everyone understand this is how we're looking at it, how we should be thinking about it from a financial sector point of view, which may be different than some other spaces. So, as that work continues to go on, they've also created a risk management framework, still a little rudimentary, but at least getting some stuff out there to have people start to think about some of these areas. So we're seeing a lot of work from the financial sector moving forward on that. But I had moved from that office over to become the Chief Technology Officer, and in that role, my responsibility was rolling out AI across the organization. Treasury at that time had around 100,000 employees, and we had to figure out how to be able to roll it out in a safe, secure manner with new parameters, safeguards, guardrails out there, and to be able to really understand why we were using it. We had a lot of people who were saying we need it just because we need it, because we saw somebody else using it, and we should be doing it today. And that was not the right answer, right? We had to figure out why you're using it. Is it beneficial? And is it the right tool for you? And so we ended up coming up with a technique in which we were able to get a containerized version of some of the different models and be able to share that so that if people were using it and using it in their purpose of work, the information wouldn't flow outside of the Treasury. As you can imagine, I assume here everybody files a tax return. April 15th is coming up. I know I have to worry about it. But in that space, right, you wouldn't want your tax returns to be uploaded into a file in the ChatGPT or whatever, and then before you know it, somebody can download it through the back end, right? So we had to be able to make a system in which they could do what they need to do without it flowing in the wrong direction. So that was a bit of a challenge. The also challenge we have with that is getting people to break out of their comfort zone. Everyone told me that they have a lot of work to do, and this was going to be one more tool, and they didn't want to do the training. They just wanted to jump into it and play with it. And we said, that's great. How about if we actually give you training? And so we made people actually go through the module to get certified to be able to do that. The training they got a year and a half ago is probably pretty much useless now. But the basics is they now know some basic information out there, and now they can move forward from there, right? A lot of that training was really just the concepts, not so much like prompt engineering, but kind of getting them to the right spot. So as we tried to deploy that, it became really important to kind of figure out why we were using it, what we were going to do, and how we build an ecosystem to work the right way. So, why does this moment matter? And I think, why am I here today? So I think, what we're seeing in the report and going forward is that critical infrastructure is now the infrastructure. I mean, AI is now part of the infrastructure. It's not an add-on. It's not something off to the side, right? It's now running a lot of these systems. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they told me, we don't run AI within our network. I was like, of course you do. You just don't know it. I'll tell you, we had one big software vendor who runs one of Treasury's main systems, and every time something came through, their AI agent automatically popped back up. And we said, turn it off. And they said, we turn it off over and over again. And we kept having to turn it off because that was a function that they assumed was a key function. It had to work for everything else to work. And we kept saying we weren't going to take that risk on a system that we didn't have comfort with. So it became an ongoing battle. And really, this cybersecurity is being fundamentally reshaped, right? We're going to be looking at this in just a different way. And I think some of the challenges we're going to have are going to be exciting for those, especially earlier in their career. But I think a lot of the professors here are going to be able to do some really exciting stuff as they now look at new techniques that just weren't available before, that are now going to be able to add both security and safety, but also add some risk to the environment. And I think we're currently entering this inflection point. We know something's going to change. I think there's a lot of angst around there. I have two kids in college, one a freshman, one a sophomore. I'm nervous. Are they going to have a job in 2 years or 3 years when they graduate? And at the end of the day, I keep reminding myself, one of the most important things in college is not necessarily what you learn, it's how to think, right? And how to be able to examine problems and be able to expose the problem to your new thought processes to be able to get to the right spot, right? And that inquisitiveness is something I hope that they continue to learn, and hopefully everybody here continues to learn. Because this is, once again, a new tool, right? No matter what people tell you, it's not going to destroy humanity. It's not going to destroy everybody's jobs. It's going to impact a lot of people and change stuff. But just as the typewriter went away when we went to word processors, right? Just as the internet changed a lot of stuff we were looking at in the past, there's going to be new opportunities, right? We just have to be comfortable with change. And I think that's something we all have to learn about as we move forward. But we do know, right, there's a lot of concerns we have to be worried about in the deployment of AI. So I'm a lawyer by training, as was said before, and there's now a database of how many times AI has hallucinated or has been able to identify AI has hallucinated in court cases. So right now there's 1,277 that have been identified across 33 countries, right? And clearly that's a judge and law clerks who are just not paying attention, not caring about their job, and just letting stuff go through. And it's hard. I was a lawyer for a while, and it's hard to be able to do that. But it doesn't take away from the core responsibility of making sure you're really focused on what you're supposed to be doing. And if we let these things slip in, sooner or later it's going to undercut what we're trying to do overall. So I hope, at the end of the day, what we have to do, what hopefully Purdue and other institutes of higher learning across the country are really going to start to think about what are the new management techniques, right? Because the way in which you do it today is not the way in which you're going to do this before, right? Are we just going to be managing agents as they do stuff? Are we going to manage the outputs of our generative AI questions that are going into it? If we ever achieve superintelligence AI, how are we going to manage that going forward? And it's going to be different, right? We're going to have to look at it a different way. And we've already had some examples of that, right? Just a few years ago, everyone got hit with COVID, right? Everybody's old enough to remember COVID. I always hate when I say everybody's here is old enough to remember 9/11, and then I realize I'm talking to college students, and then I feel really, really old because they always ask me, tell me what happened that day, because I wasn't here. And then I cry, but that's a different story. But, as we're looking through this, right, we've all gone through this environment of massive change, right? We were hanging out with our friends in school, and the next day we were at home, maybe being able to talk to them, maybe being able to talk through a window or something, but we had to go through a different environment. So we have to remember, right, we all got through that really successfully, and at the end of the day, we'll get through this too, and it'll be different on the other side, but it'll be exciting. So one of the things I wanted to mention was that, in the first presentation, they were talking about, that one day there'll be an AI company that's worth over $1 billion that has one person. This guy has a company worth $1.8 billion, but he has two people. He got tired of working a little bit too much, so he hired his brother. So really, just to be clear, he has $1.8 billion in sales. I don't know what that actually means for how much he actually makes. But, you could do a company now with minimal staff. There's actually a company that you can hire that will make a company for you with no employees, right? And that company already has about $6 million of revenue of just creating companies with the whole shell ready to go, and you just plug in what you want. So it's changing the way in which we did that before. To grow a company to $1.8 billion would have taken people many, many years to decades. But as you look at this, I always remember the story of, you remember the Olsen twins? Remember from way back when? Right, they had $1 billion cosmetic company that cleared like $100,000 a year because it was not really profitable. So, you always have to take these with some skepticism, but clearly something is working here and something's changing. So how do we kind of harvest that energy? Because this guy found a niche, right? And how do we kind of encourage other folks to be able to think about that, right? As we come through this process, everybody wants a job in a company maybe, but there's also a lot of entrepreneurial talent. How do we encourage that to happen, right? And I know Purdue's a great place to be able to encourage that. So as you're looking at these opportunities, don't necessarily look at this is going to hurt me somehow. How's it going to help me? What can I do differently? So, and I'll go over this. I think, we already heard about this a little bit before, but really just the progression of where we are. Way back when we had predictive models, and when we talked to the financial sector about AI, we said, oh, this is new. And they said, well, we've been using AI since about the 50s. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, we've been doing predictive analytics, right? And they've been doing predictive models for a long time. And they consider that really the forerunner of AI today because you didn't have to have humans involved so much. But then, of course, we went to generative systems, right? The ChatGPTs of the world, the Geminis, things like that. And what we've seen is that's a progression, right, in which you can interact with it, and then you can tell it what to do, and it will give you an answer for that. The interesting part now we're getting to this autonomous agents. Has anybody made an autonomous agent themselves? One, two, yeah. It's interesting to do, right? It's kind of scary when you do it, but it also takes a lot of burden off you because you don't have to do that monotonous task at the end of the day. And the difference between the generative AI, you tell it what you want. Autonomous AI, you tell the goal you want to have it done, and it figures out how to get there, right? So there's a lot of ability for it to work on its own. I think we're going to have some challenges on that as we move forward just for policy developments. If I create an autonomous agent, who's responsible at the end of the day, right? I create it as an employee. It does what I want to do and then goes off the rails at some point. Am I responsible? Is the corporation responsible? Or do we have now some assignment of responsibility to the AI agent itself because we had no control how it was being done? Almost like an independent contractor, right? You tell them, as an example, I want my house cleaned. I don't care how you do it, just clean it, right? Am I responsible for how they clean it? Usually not, right? They're independent. If whatever happens, how's it work in this place? I think an interesting challenge we're just going to have as we build forward. But what we're seeing, right, is that AI is really still in the tool phase, but it's going to be going to the decision-making phase. And that's going to be interesting to see where the human actually interacts with that. I think, as I always think about it, humans are two things. They're really a lot of times stupid and lazy, and I'm that both most of the time, because I want to do my work faster and better, and I don't always check the work I should, right? And if you're trusting your employee to do stuff, or whoever it is, are they really going through all the steps, or are they figuring out how to just get through stuff in a faster place? But the human oversight is really where it's going to become more complex, right? The governance models are going to have to change. What are we demanding from the employee? What are we demanding from the organization? How are we going to roll it out? That was one of the things I was focused on a lot at Treasury, was trying to figure out the right governance model and who's going to be in charge, right? At the end of the day, it wouldn't have been me because I was the deputy, but it would have been the chief AI officer who would have got yelled at, which of course as a deputy I would have got yelled at secondly, and not a good day for me. But you had to create a new model of thinking of how to do that. There's not a model that exists yet, right? And that's something that's going to be an interesting research project for a lot of people to figure out how you create those kind of models going forward. But we see that even language is still not keeping up to where we're going. Does everybody know what vibe coding is? Right? You know what vibe coding is. So I put it in Chat GPT to Gemini today, and what does it come up as? Vibe coding is a 2025 era software development approach. So that's telling me it's an old thing already, right? And I'm like, wow, it's already past the stage. And I think we've seen some advances already in which you don't have to do vibe coding anymore, right? In which you could actually just have it do it itself and not even have to do the coding effort you did before. You just say, I want something to work, and it'll go through. Are you going to check it? It seems to be getting better and better that you may not even have to check it anymore. You'll have to run it at the end, but you're not going to go through that normal software development life cycle, right? A normal software development life cycle, I think, is like 6 stages, and you can get down to 2, you can get down to 3, right? Identify the need, tell the system to make it, and then check at the end, right? Instead of the backward loop going forward. And this is a challenge that we were going to have at Treasury in the same place. When we were trying to create apps before for what employees wanted to do, we had a whole app development team. You would put in your requirements, you would go over there, they'll come back weeks to months in the future, and then you'll have an app that'll be fully designed to be able to do that. Now with some of these systems, you can actually just do it on your own, right? Create your own agent going forward, see what happens, right? How do we then lose control of that thing, especially if agents are running wild across the organization doing stuff? So, one of the things we have to now think about is how AI is going to be transforming cybersecurity. And I think this is the place where there's going to be a lot of interesting places out there. So, defenders are going to be going more to automation, detection of scale. The attackers are going to be going through some of these things of, things we've already seen before, but in a different way. Right? When we talked to the financial sector, they told us phishing attacks, we've been seeing those for decades. Bank robberies, they've been going on for about 600 years. Right? So, it's something is always happening to us, financial institutions, and we just got to try to figure out how to stay ahead of it. It's not going to be easy, it's not going to be fun, but they just understood this is the next evolution. But the challenge that they have and everybody else has is really understanding how this is going to be going forward. And I think the other challenge we have is the speed going forward on this kind of stuff. And I think I mentioned yesterday, right, a congressman came out and said, can you have a bank run in a couple of microseconds as opposed to days or hours? SVB Bank, when they collapsed, it took about 6 hours for that to happen, from when it showed up on CNBC in the morning until it actually collapsed around 3 in the afternoon. Really interesting TV that day. I was sitting at home watching it. But now, you can have a bank run in which people could just, or an agent can just identify, I need my money out of this place, do it autonomously, kick out all my money, and then the bank collapses on its own because it just doesn't have the ability to satisfy the withdrawal request. But how are we going to look at that going forward? I think that's going to be a challenge on this space. So as we think about what the new threat landscape is, and I think, once again, the new threat landscape is some of the old threat landscape with some additional things added in, right, and some speed to execution happening. So AI-enabled social engineering. I think we've all heard the story about the organization somewhere in Southeast Asia in which a guy got called in. He thought it was his bosses on the other side of the Zoom call. It was all AI generated, and then he made a big money transfer, and then finally found out that they weren't real. I still haven't found anybody who could tell me that's actually a true story. It's a great story. It's possible to happen, but a year and a half ago, that AI technology of people was honestly just not there. It may have been that the guy was inclined to do it. It may have just been a made-up story. I don't know. I just can't find any evidence. But it's something that's probably going to happen at some point, right? We already had the voice generated in which somebody will call you, telling you they've kidnapped your daughter, or your daughter calls or whatever and says that, I've been kidnapped, please send money, right? We've already seen that. So you can easily see the next step going there. But the social engineering attack, if you have a call center or anybody, they can easily call in once again with fake information and try to see how they can pull the information out of all the call center employees, right, who are just really reading from a script. Identity spoofing and deepfakes is something that I think is going to become just more of a challenge. Right now, there's a way for us to kind of understand as we're looking at people, right? Visual is very difficult to overcome. Voice and visual together makes it really difficult for anybody to fake that. But if you can start to add those two things together, you can see in which things come forward. The challenge right now, right, is that when you question one of these things, you can ask questions outside the normal pathway, and it won't be able to answer. And you can say, okay, that was a fake. But at some point, maybe it'll start coming up where somebody keeps programming it with the right answer at the end of the day. And we've seen this kind of on the offensive side. There's a couple stories of telemarketers calling people, and there's at least one gentleman who set up a AI agent on the other side to see how long he could keep the telemarketer on the call. I think his longest time was 2.5 hours, right, of just nonsensical questions that my grandmother would ask, that I think every telemarketer knows they would ask, but it just kept going through the loop. I can't find this. How do I do that, right? All that kind of stuff. But you can also imagine attackers doing the same stuff. So you also have to worry, and this is one of the things that we heard too, was that the attacks on the AI agents themselves and the models. Now this is something, data poisoning, that's always been out there, right? If you watch the news, you see a lot of times in which information that's not true popping up, and you have to really kind of make sure it's correct or not. The challenge we have here is that if you're creating a model yourself, you have the data. If you're relying upon somebody else's model, how are you going to make sure it's valid? There was an interesting way to be able to address this. In the state of Virginia, they were going to mandate that no locality in the state of Virginia would be able to use any model unless they can prove, that was certified by somebody that you should use it. So you're going to have like a UI underwriter laboratory listing or something like that. And somebody told me that. I said, that's great. So it's going to take how long for that approval to come through, right? Probably weeks to months. And a new AI model just came out tomorrow, right? And what are you going to do? Wait on the model 6 months old to be able to do something, right? As opposed to what's state of the art today. And plus, if anybody's ever tried to negotiate one of these contracts or anything, the answer is always no from the other side. Let me see how you did it. No, I'm not going to tell you, right? And so it's not going to be really beneficial, nor would you really understand what you're seeing. I mean, mathematical equations are really interesting. They're great. I don't really understand a lot of them. And you can imagine a farmer, as we heard earlier today, a bank teller, or somebody else being, yeah, it's math, it must make sense, right? So how are we going to look at that? The interesting one that's also coming out is polymorphic attacks. And those are which they change on the fly, right? So you can imagine an AI agent, right, sending out a spear phishing or some kind of attack and just continue to send it out over and over again, get the feedback of what didn't work for you, and then send out another attack, right? Continue to ping the effort until they finally break through. Just like you try to do password cracking, right? But how can you do it in this space? And now the cost can drop down so much, you can imagine these things rotating through. And of course, once you break it somewhere, if you know what the system it is, you now have the key, and you can then attack other people. If you remember many years ago, there was war dialing all the time, right? You would drive up and down a highway, you would see which store had a weak point, and then you would put out your antenna, figure it out, and then attack them, and just keep going up and down the street. So another thing that's going to be interesting is the identification of vulnerabilities. So everybody heard about the Anthropic Mythos thing that just came out, right? So it was just released yesterday, or it wasn't released, right? A press release came out. Just reading the Washington Post, according to it, and this Mythos just identified thousands of vulnerabilities in web browsers and other secure technology. You can imagine, right, this is an interesting opportunity to kind of actually fix some of this stuff. One of the 0 days they found, and they were all 0 days they identified, was in a 27-year-old browser that's considered one of the most secure browsers, but the vulnerabilities are for 27 years, right? Just nobody ever thought of looking there or was able to find it. So you can imagine, right, on the one side, this could be very positive technology from the US side, right, in which we'd use this, I would assume, to be able to do good stuff, find the vulnerabilities, notify the firms who have produced this software or hardware, and tell them that let's try to fix it because we can tell you exactly what the problem is. We would have a big problem if, say, China were to get this, right, or some other adversarial nation. They would not be so helpful. I assume they would be running the technology to try to find the vulnerabilities and then try to figure out how to actively exploit it, or at least be able to plant stuff in the system so that one day later they can use that logic bomb to take down stuff, especially within the infrastructure. And we've seen stories about that already happening and trying to figure out how to rid our systems of that. So, you know, hopefully this identification of vulnerabilities, I think one editorial point here, I think this is something that's going to disrupt the entire threat hunting system that's out there. Because if you start to identify these vulnerabilities and tell a software maker you have all these vulnerabilities, hopefully that then means the system is now more secure at the end of the day, and that the people who search for vulnerabilities and the threat hunting teams may not be in existence the same way they are currently, right? And I mean, my goal has always been information sharing is great, but if you fix the problem, I don't have to share anything. And maybe we can finally get to a point in which we actually fix problems. So it might be very beneficial in that place. And of course, the ability to attack using AI, right? That kind of runs through all these processes. How are the bad guys going to be able to figure out how to use AI and harness the energy to be able to start to attacking these systems? So I think as we move forward on this, we're going to be really interesting of how we're going to tackle this. So what are some of these new attack surfaces we're going to have to be worried about? And once again, these are not necessarily new attack surfaces, but they are attack surfaces that are not going to be able to more easily be attacked than maybe in the past. So of course, the training data, right? Poisoning the training data, you can imagine many different times, many different ways you can do that. We've seen instances where China has attempted to do that on some models in the past. We could see that, imagining going forward in other places too. You know, there's many different examples across all different sectors. If your imagination is out there, you know, data is just so critical for everything at the end of the day. If you can poison that data, and people are going to rely upon it because it's data, it must be true. And nobody's going to really go through it every single time and check every piece of information. And you can then imagine that you can have some major problems with that data, actually what comes out of that training model. But of course, the models themselves, both extraction and manipulation. So financial firms, other firms spend tons of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars on creating models themselves, right? This is the whole process of the stock market of trying to do stuff, but we see farmers doing the same stuff, right? They create models to figure out when am I going to plant the seed? When am I going to harvest it, right? It's the optimal time to be able to do all this stuff. You see it in chemical manufacturers and other places, right? Airlines have this all the time, creating models to kind of maximize throughput tied to airports. And if you're able to kind of figure out how to steal that model and then be able to use it for yourself, right? Industrial espionage is something that is in existence and has been that way for a long time. But we also have to worry about manipulation of that, right? Maybe you don't want to steal the data, you just want to throw in some bad information. When I was at Treasury, one of the things I always remembered, right, is that in the event that somebody manipulated the stock market and threw in some bad trades at some point that raised the stock price or lowered the stock price of a certain price, how do you figure out how to extract those, right? Can you actually extract that information and go back to a time when things were good, or do you just have to power through that and try to kill off those trades even though they made the rest of the market act inappropriately for the rest of the day and misprice stuff? And you can see that in many other places, that same kind of manipulation to make you do something you don't want to do necessarily. And of course, supply chains, we talked about that a little earlier today too. but this is going to be very critical, right? As we think about supply chains themselves, I think COVID was one of the things that showed us supply chains are very fragile and have potential problems on good days, right? Hospitals barely make it by on a good day. COVID messed them up quite a bit. But you can imagine in a situation where you can be using AI to kind of mess with those supply chains, to be able to impact the way in which things are going and be able to cause additional damage. In that place where we get the life and safety, right, tied to supply chains, you might actually be talking about death and destruction, although some of the other ones could lead to that easier too, right? So attacks on those issues are going to be something, we always have to kind of think about and really kind of think about what we could be doing in that space to address the challenges. So another thing that's just really concerning is the concentration of AI, right? And the models out there and how many are out there. So when AI first came out several years ago, many firms decided they were going to create their own models. They already have their own data, and we'll just be able to do that. Turns out making a model is very, very expensive, as we've seen through both the data center construction going on, and for some reason, Anthropic dropping their code visibly last week, which makes no sense to me, but clearly they just dropped a couple $1 billion in open source that who knows people are going to do with that, right? But these things are not cheap to make, and that means, of course, we're going to get more concentrated. Normally, for some reason, we always get to monopolies of 3, and right now it looks like we're pretty close to 3, right? We have Gemini, we have OpenAI, we have Anthropic. Who knows if more will pop up or how that will do. Gronk is out there to some extent. Maybe they make it when they do the SpaceX IPO, who knows? But as we get whatever the concentration is, it's a smaller concentration. And of course, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Does the world come to our models and use those as the basis? Are other countries going to make their own models? And we'll have to share between the different ones. That kind of hegemony or multipolar world is going to be interesting, and how and who wins the AI race going forward. I think you've probably seen a lot of investment on this, a lot of issues going forward, but how are we going to be able to tackle those kind of things going forward? And of course, the other challenge we have, right, is the shared dependencies. At the end of the day, if we're all using the same model, getting the same answer, it looks like we're all using the same stuff, right? We have a little bit of that in some software that's used across many different industries, but the U.S. is still a very multi-software provider, multi-hardware provider industry, right? We don't just have one. Other countries have focused just on one. But of course, then you lead to this potential of a system going down, a problem happening, right? We saw this when CrowdStrike went down a couple years ago, and all the ripple effects that happened to that. Luckily, not everybody uses CrowdStrike, but you can imagine those kind of things happening with an AI going down, a model going down for some period of time. And then, of course, the one thing we always kind of think about, at least when I was a treasurer, was systemic risk. What does this mean going forward? And I think you heard this throughout both days, right? What does systemic risk mean at the end of the day? I'm happy to hear that Purdue is really leading the effort in the farm area and the food and agriculture space, because that is a systemic risk, right? If that goes down, at some point that becomes a problem, but that becomes a risk, both domestic and national security. But then how about other spaces here, right, where it goes up to that? And what buffers, what things can government do or other private sector firms can do to hopefully make sure those systemic risks are buffered before it happens, right? If you think about the stock market, in the case of a big drop or a big rise, they put buffers on it to stop the market for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, so that people can kind of get their heads level straight again. What kind of buffers would you have in this, right? In the event that something went really haywire with AI, right? What would that mean? But it's something we definitely have to explore as a country. So, one of the things leading into that is, where are the regulations going? What are we looking at right now? And so I think there's an interesting way this is going forward. In the last administration, there was an executive order, and basically what I was told to do was that we could not roll out anything until we made sure it was safe and secure, right? That was the number one thing out there, which caused some slowness on getting things done, and the inability for us to kind of innovate the way which we wanted to do for some of it. This administration takes a different tact, right? Which is the tact of, let's get it out there, let's see what happens, Let's explore, let's see what's going on, and then we can clean up the mess if it's not too big afterwards. But this administration cares more about innovation, right, of doing that. And so, two diametrically looking at these things. If we look at Europe, of course, as they always do, before anything else happens. Anybody here European, by the way? I don't want to insult anybody. Yeah. The way the EU always does is we're going to regulate before it's even an industry, right? So they put out regulations on how AI is going to be done before they even developed a domestic industry. So I don't know what they were regulating because there was nothing there yet. But very prescriptive, as they normally are. You can do this, you can't do that. And that leads to some of the challenges you have in Europe of not being able to innovate the way in which they should. And so, it's going to be also interesting as this moves forward, right? Which idea wins at the end of the day? I think it'll be always the tension between the U.S. effort of let's explore and the EU of let's make sure nothing bad happens. But then you have other countries out there who are also looking at this space, right? You have a lot of countries in Africa trying to figure out how to do this, in India, Southeast Asia, and of course China trying to figure out what they should be doing in this space. So, how's that going to move forward is going to just be, I think, a challenge, but something we all should be paying attention to, especially as you're thinking about your next research opportunity and where that's going to go from there. But we do have still some big regulatory challenges, right? Even with all that we've done so far, there's still not a really clear definition of what AI is and what it isn't, right? There's a lot of fluff out there. I was actually I was speaking at George Mason University on a panel, and I was talking about how I was really concerned about AI agents. And the person next to me, who was from a major financial firm, said, "Oh, well, we taught them all prompt engineering so that we don't have that issue." It's like, you don't even know what I just said, do you? Because I'm talking about agents, and you're talking about generative AI, right? They're not the same, right? And so, how are we going to figure this out, right? That we're using the right lexicon for the right stuff. The biggest challenge we have here is anybody a salesperson by training? Yeah, salespeople will tell you whatever they want, right? And try to get you to buy the product. And you as a consumer have to be able to make sure you're understanding what's going on. They have a role, I'm not insulting them in any way, but you have to be able to understand why you're doing what you're doing and really what the benefit of this tool you're trying to bring into the system. And of course, we also heard this one of the presentations earlier about explainability versus performance, right? Explainability is trying to figure out what it actually does, and performance is trying to get it done as quick as it can, right? And most of the things right now are black boxes. You'll get the right answer at the end, but you won't know how it was done. That becomes really difficult in a lot of spaces. Any kind of discriminatory lendings type stuff, anything in which, once again, going back to farm, if they're asking, how are you raising your chickens, and you can't really explain it, you just say, well, at the end of the day, they have X amount of fat content. How'd you do it? I don't know. AI just fed them the right stuff. That's not the answer. So how do we kind of work through some of those challenges? Or I guess I could have used the beer example on that. That would have been better, right? Because that's much more automated. But then, of course, the issue is the oversight of third-party models. And I think this gets back to what I was mentioning yesterday regarding Anthropic and the Pentagon, their fight over this issue, right? At the end of the day, who's in charge? Civil authority, right? Congress, the president, through the imposition of laws, right, that are passed through your elected representatives, or private sector companies who have ideas of what they think society should look like, and then being able to exert their power over civil authority doing stuff. I don't know what the right answer is on that, right? I think the challenge we're going to have to do is figure that out. Is there a way in which their concepts can go through the system to be able to have that be what it is? Or is it going to be in which it's, we just look to the legislative branches in the states who act when the U.S. Congress doesn't, to be able to get the answers? But it's going to be an interesting challenge as do this. Anybody out there who's interested in public policy, this is going to be a topic for many years going forward of this area going back and forth. So what is this, at the end of the day, what does this mean for you? AI plus cyber skills are just really in high demand. Why is it in high demand? A lot of companies just don't know what to do yet, right? They're just trying to figure this out, right? They've seen the advertisements on TV. They've seen the discussions from folks all over the place. Everybody's using AI. Everybody's using AI. And I also heard the comment today that the federal government is way behind everybody else. Of course they are. I don't know if that's true. I think we're a little ahead of a lot of private sector firms. I know the Department of Transportation is probably ahead of everybody else on the technology related to self-driving cars. And the stuff that's coming out is really going through them into the private sector firms, just because they're making sure the security is built in the right way. Other ones are more laggards. You can imagine some, I won't name any specifically, who are kind of slow to the game. But as we continue to roll this out, right, we have to figure out why we're doing this. And that's where the education is really going to become critically important, right, that we are going to have a highly specialized and skilled workforce to be able to attack some of these problems. The challenge we have, though, with this space is that not everybody's going to be able to move up the value chain, right? I always hate to say this, right, but not everybody can become a PhD. Not just because they don't have the desire or drive, but some just don't have that capability to move up that chain. And that's nothing against them. I mean, they just don't have the ability, the cognitive ability to get there. So how do we make sure we don't let those folks fall behind, right? We need to look after the whole society and figure out how they can all be productive and being able to use everybody's special skill to be able to help us drive the economy to where it is. And that's going to take a big balancing act, right? Because once again, if you give me any of these mathematical equations that were shown, I have no idea what you're saying. I show any of these to my son, who's a math major, and he'll be able to explain it really easily and still not be able to explain it to me. Or as one example in AI, I don't know if anybody's heard this, but I was talking to one professor, I forget where he was from, but he said there are 7 dimensions in the universe. I don't know if anybody knows that, theoretically. But we only know of 3. We sort of know of 4, right? We know the 4th. But dimensions are only a mathematical calculation. So you can, in their theory, was apply AI to identify these new dimensions out there, and then be able to explain them back to humans in a way in which we can understand it to then work to apply it. And I was like, wow, that's bizarre. But I mean, if it's only math, right, it's math. And somebody can figure it out. You just got to figure out what the calculation is. And you can imagine that kind of breaking stuff into a whole different environment. I don't know what those other dimensions are. I don't know what they would mean. I don't know what we'd use them for, but they'd be kind of cool. So we'll see what that goes. But we also then see this interdisciplinary efforts moving forward, right, of trying to figure out how to be able to use skills across many different disciplines, right? So not only that you're in one space, but you're also able to help out other ones. When I was in my office, I had 32 employees. Only 2 of us were lawyers. Neither had practiced in a long time, and everybody else had a different college major. Why was that important for me? To get that interdisciplinary conversation going. I had a guy who was a cartographer, which I didn't realize till later, and he started showing me graphs. I was like, oh, that's where it comes in handy, right? But you use different skill sets and you build that through, and at the end of the day, we were all doing cybersecurity, and that was helpful for us. So you're going to see a lot of these things start to move forward. But one of the things they hear, right, that I challenge everybody here, is that at the end of the day, you're going to be able to create these new norms, right? You're going to see it come up from other places. But when you go out, leave from here, not only you, but also the professors here, they're going to start to think about how do we think about these problems in different ways, right? They're going to be the big tech companies who are going to come out and create AI. But that's only a tool. How that's going to be used, how it's going to be used in society generally, what we're going to think the good right and left boundaries are something that we're going to have to decide what they're going to be. And how does that work? I think that's a challenge everybody kind of has to think about as they move forward in this space. And of course, I wrote some more notes here, but the issue for that really is this whole governance model, right? We do not have any techniques now on how to govern an AI agent, right? I was with the financial ISAC in Florida last month, and their big issue, 3 different panels were talking about how you onboard, offboard, and monitor an agent within your system, right? And all the techniques that financial firms have are onboarding a human employee, right? You come in, you get credentials, you get a laptop. When you get fired, you get your laptop taken away, your credentials taken away, and somebody escorts you out of the building. An agent, how do you do that? Especially when you don't know an agent was created. Me trying to do my own job, create an agent to do my job better, right? It's not authorized, except it is, right? As an employee, I should be allowed to do that. And then at the end of the day, something's going through that system. And the other big challenge they have is what happens when an AI agent becomes abandoned. So I've created a spreadsheet. I've created an agent to monitor spreadsheets, to be able to gather information to give to my boss every day. I then get promoted, I forget about this document, or I get fired, or I get sick, agent keeps running in the background. What happens at that point, right? Who now owns that agent? How do I offboard that? How do I even find that out? Maybe there are techniques out there, but we're talking about governance here. How do you govern that responsibility to do that? And how do you make up the right policies and procedures? Once again, the old model, send it to somebody to create an app, build it through, onboard, offboard, all really well and easy to do. Agents are not, because you don't know what your employees are doing. They're trying to do the right thing, right? Nobody's trying to be evil, but it becomes at some point maybe an insider threat that we have to worry about. So, as this moves forward, we're going to definitely see, the future of work is just going to be different, right? The way it is today, and this is, everybody who's been through the 80s, right? You remember, you ever saw that movie 9 to 5, Dolly Parton's typing on a typewriter? Now it will be a word processor, if she's even doing that anymore. There's no more dictation, but we moved to a different environment. So what's the future of work going to look like going forward? I think, we had this break during COVID, which was interesting, in which we did a lot of work from home. I think that kind of damaged a lot of younger employees who didn't have that interaction with their bosses and got that foundational mentorship that needs to get done. We'll see how that all goes through. But this is even going to change that foundational thing, because you're not going through of crafting a memo or writing a document for your boss, because you're going to have AI do that. And will you even have the skills maybe to proofread? And where are you going to learn those skills to even be doing the proofreading? So it's going to have to look at this a different way and think about what am I asking for my employees? And you're going to have to think about, as you move up that value chain, what does that mean going forward? And I think that's going to affect many different things across our society. I mean, the question is here, right, as you're getting your education, very important, very valuable. Don't want to downplay that in any way. But I was at a meeting about a year and a half ago, with some folks from NIST, and we were on a panel talking about AI. And the gentleman in the back corner said, I just graduated with my master's in cybersecurity or something like that. And this guy said, yeah, that's not going to be a path anymore. And the guy said, why? He's like, we can't wait 5 years for you to come out, right? With these new technologies, how do we get you out faster? How do we train you better? How do we make sure you're able to have those skills in a faster time frame, right? Which are skills that are going to be practical going forward. Now, that's in AI. There's a lot of other places where this isn't going to impact at all, right? Other places where it's not as critical to have that time frame because it may be helpful. But this is just speeding through so fast, right? Are you going to be able to spend that amount of times, right? From the time in which my son came into college a year and a half ago until he graduates, right? How much has the world changed? And does the job that he thought he was getting when he went into school, that I thought he was going to get, is it even going to exist on the back end? Right? He'll be a knowledge worker at some point. Or will it be different, right? That's something we're going to have to think about. And he's going to have to think about himself, because I can't do the work for him, of what do you want to be? Or what's the opportunities out there? And maybe that might be, not necessarily going through the 9 to 5 workplace to do that stuff. You may have to think about different opportunities out there. Or, as this other gentleman did, create his own $1.8 billion company going forward. So, and we're just going to have to think about this. So, I think... and I don't want to be negative about any of this stuff. I think these are all huge opportunities. Every problem identified to you is problems that I think folks here can figure out and solve. And there are probably a lot of problems that you've identified just these past 2 days that you just haven't thought about yet, right? And nobody else has probably thought about. And I bet you if you go to your professor, whichever one it is, and say, I'm thinking X, they're going to be like, that's something I haven't thought about before. Not in a bad way. It's just you're thinking outside the box, which hopefully that's what Purdue and other places of higher education are doing for you, right? Crafting the next generation. And I know all the professors here are flexible in their own stuff, right? The stuff they're working on today, except for the professor who worked on beer stuff, right, is probably working on something different today than what he was then. And he's probably still studying. I'm not sure how old he is. Do you know how old he is, Steph? He was 18 when he started, he said, his research. But I think he's still conducting that same research on beer. But, and that's not a bad thing, right? But, you find a passion, good for you. Go as far as you can. Maybe you'll win a Nobel Prize out of it. I don't know. But other things, right? Be inquisitive. Think about stuff differently. Identify the hard problems. Figure out what they can be. And work as hard as you can in that space. So I think, security is going to have to be built in. We're going to have to figure out what that means going forward and how that looks. I think that's going to be a challenge we're going to have. Most of the people who I talk to who are in the AI building space don't care about security. Their issue is to try to figure out how to build this tool better, faster, and have absolute knowledge at some point. They know security is important, but that's just not what they're focused on, right? They're working on their hard problems, of which they are not the hard problem security kind of guy. Collaboration is going to be essential, right? You're not going to be able to do this on your own. You're going to have to be able to talk to people. You're going to have to be able to understand what other folks are doing. That was the one thing that I think is great about CERIAS, been going on for all these years now, is a place where we can all come together. We can talk about ideas. And hopefully at the end of this day, right, we made some friends, and we're going to continue those conversations to go forward and think about how we can kind of tackle this stuff. And we're going to have other folks who we can bounce strange ideas off of that maybe at one point become a $1.8 billion company or solve other problems. Maybe world hunger finally gets solved. But I think the one thing just to leave everybody with is the future isn't written. And I've seen Elon Musk say the world's going to be destroyed. I also said we're not going to have anything to do. We're all going to be just sitting around all the time. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. Will it change our work environment? I do know one thing in any corporation or any place I've ever worked in. When you get rid of some work, bosses come up with new ideas to do more work, right? They've always wanted to they make widgets, and now they want to make spatulas. And they've always wanted to do that, but they just didn't have the time. And now I have freed up opportunities. I'm going to make these things because I've always wanted to do it, right? And I'm going to expand the business. And I think that will be opportunities for everybody, right? You're going to be working differently. You're going to be working smarter, I think. One thing I also tell people too is that, you're going to be doing less with less. And by that, all those mundane things you hate about your job currently, you're not going to do anymore, right? That report that you used to have to talk to 10 different people to get information on, an agent's going to be able to do that for you. So you're going to be doing less work, different work, probably with less resources because it's going to take you less time, but your boss will find something to keep you busy with. So it's not going to be something in which you'll be sitting around for any extended period of time, unless Elon Musk is right and robots take over the world and they just serve me drinks on. Do you have a beach around here? No beach? Down by the river or something, right? So we'll see how this all goes. So, but I think opportunities, right? And we have to always think of positive opportunities, right? The typewriter didn't destroy anything. The telephone didn't do. Anybody who grew up in the 70s remembers the television was going to destroy all communication between adults because we just sat in front of TVs, right? And that didn't happen. And every single thing we adapt to and get better. But that's where everybody here helps us get better, right? It's not just done in a void. There's actually steering that happens, right? Your research, your efforts help us get to that place through your discoveries and knowledge transfer and innovations. So with that, any questions? Oh, there you go, questions?
If
Wow.
you have a question, raise a hand. We'll get a microphone to you.
That's a weird question mark, by the way.
Yeah.
I think I used the Purdue font. I don't know what it was. But anyway.
Well, I will say that we are fortunate that we are at a point in time where our speaker isn't an AI agent, and we're not sending our AI agents to listen to you. So,
Yes. But I can't wait till I get those AI agent phone calls. On my LinkedIn page, it says I'm retired, and I can clearly see people use templates. You can say, Brian, at retired, do you need our service? Like, you literally have in a thing that says I'm retired. What, do you think that's the name of a company? Although, maybe it's a good name for a company. I didn't think about that. Maybe it's telling me something. Oh, question?
Yeah. So earlier in your presentation, you briefly touched on AI agents getting to the point eventually of like making decisions on their own. And I'm wondering just what your opinions on that are, based on the fact that they can't really be held accountable for the decisions that they make.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the interesting challenge for humans, and at the end of the day, the lazy human, right? Are you going to allow it to make the decision for you or not? So the example will be, I need to get a flight back to DC today, right? Am I going to want to put input into it to say I need certain times, or just give me a flight back to DC? And it routes me through 7 different airports to get back there because it left the time I wanted to leave, but it clearly wasn't the arrival time I wanted. So I think that's going to be a challenge of how much agency do you want to give these agents, and how much do you want to take responsibility for it? And I think that's going to be the hard management technique. And by management, I just don't mean inside of a company, I mean in your personal life. How much are you going to turn over to them to be able to do stuff? And you've seen, there's one I've seen, you could turn over your passwords to your brokerage account, and it will set up a portfolio that mirrors what Congress people are doing tied to investments, and match whenever their public things come out to trade stock, even with to hopefully get their gain. I'm like, what? I don't even know who you are, and you want me to pass over my password? And clearly that's just an agent running in the background, right? Somebody's not doing that. They're just taking the information, they're running against some kind of algorithm, they're just making it happen, right? So am I comfortable with that? No. Am I more comfortable maybe with a self-driving car? Yes, right? I made a risk-based decision on that place, and I'm managing what I feel comfortable. But I think this is going to be a hard issue we're going to have to think of as society as a whole, but also individually, of what are we comfortable turning over to somebody else. Now, we've already done a lot of that stuff in many other spaces, right? We don't grow our own food anymore, right? We outsource that to farmers, right? We don't manufacture our own cars or TVs or anything like that. We outsource that to somebody and buy that, and we're comfortable with that. But when we're talking about something that is not a person on the other side that we can't touch at the end of the day, or how are we going to feel comfortable doing that? And is that agent somehow responsible? So we think about it in our normal space, right? I watch a lot, you probably have personal injury lawyer advertisements all the time. We're going to hold them accountable. Well, I know how to hold a person accountable, right? I can sue them. I know how to hold a corporation kind of accountable, right? Because they can get fined, they can pay a penalty, they can't go to jail, right? What's an agent, right? Is an agent the way you normally think of it? It's my responsibility, they're working on my behalf, which is something completely autonomous that's out there in which it becomes its own legal entity at some point. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how that's going to play out, but it'd be interesting to see how we as a society think about that going forward, because can you kill an agent then, right? If an agent's doing something wrong, can I kill your agent because it's not doing what it's supposed to do, or are only you allowed to kill your agent? Lots of it. Can companies ban agents from doing stuff? The way they do it, like Ticketmaster, you can't have agents kind of just pinging to buy best tickets, right? So there's going to be a lot of challenges we have at this going forward. But I think that's going to be an interesting research project for a lot of folks to think about what that is, so we kind of create that framework that's going to be able to manage that. So, did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Another question? Yep. Oh.
Hi, Brian. Thank you.
You're not allowed to ask questions, I thought. Oh, no, that's okay.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for the talk. I imagine over your long, distinguished career, there must be a fond memory from your career in government, or a funny anecdote that you may want to share. I'm just curious, what comes to top of mind that you'd like to share of either a funny anecdote or some experience you had over your career that you're fond of?
Yeah, I mean, the highlight of my career, I think, was I coordinated the activities for Treasury on behalf during Hurricane Katrina, right? We just had a lot of suffering going on, and really being able to make sure that the people who were suffering were able to get what they needed to get. And sorry, I get choked up, but I always remember I was visiting my in-laws in Wisconsin, and my mother-in-law was giving me crap. Is this being filmed? That's okay. She knows. But she was giving me crap about, why are you on the phone right now? And I said, you have two choices. I can get off the phone and you won't get your Social Security check. Or I can stay on the phone and you will get it. What do you want to do? Say, Brian, do whatever you need to do, right? And so at that point, there's a human dimension there, right? That I'm helping people, right, to be able to do that. And I thought that was one of the benefits of me being in government. There's a lot of negative stories I could tell you, but I think, working in government, understanding what you wanted to do, especially as I came in after 9/11, was really an interesting way to help a lot of people who were in bad spot. And then also helping guide the way cyber policy is today, right? I'll tell you, if I wasn't there, if SPAF wasn't there, we would be just in a different place than where we are today. We've had many conversations over the years about, how do we guide this to get to a better place, right? And you'll see a lot of the things that are, you think is commonplace today, were groundbreaking at the time. And we had to make it up on the fly. And those are really rewarding because we knew it was the right thing to do. We talked to the experts and built that, and that really became really, really powerful. So, but there was a question behind too. Are we going over time or not? I don't fly out till 3 o'clock tomorrow, so I could stay all day long. But I don't think anybody wants. Oh, they spiked the mic on you, didn't they?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. So I'm Sayuda. I'm an undergrad, and I know there's also a lot of other undergrads in the room with us. So I was wondering what advice you would have to give to us, or just like what advice you would give to yourself at our age.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the same thing I
you.
spoke to, I forgot your name, Swastik, at lunch today, right? And the same advice I gave yesterday when staff asked me the exact same question. When you're in a meeting like this, meet everybody you can. Every single meeting you can go to, meet everyone you can, say hi to them. Nobody here is going to say no to you when you go up to say hi. And if it is, they shouldn't be here, right? But that's a benefit, right? Use these as networking opportunities to get to the next spot. Build out your network as much as you can. Learn as much as you can from everybody here, because as a whole, they all know more than anybody individually. And that's going to be very beneficial to you at the end of the day. And I told SPAF the same thing. Almost everybody in Washington, I think, knows me, right? This is the same way they know you. Why? Because we showed up at everything, right? We were there all the time. And we're always volunteering to help people. How do we help you get there, right? What could we do in that space, right? Every conversation I ever ended was always, what can I be doing to help you? And everybody would be like, oh, I don't have an ask. I was like, that's okay. But you know, the job was to ask the question, see what we could do to help to get them to the next spot. But also more importantly is to deliver. If you're going to promise to do something, make sure you make that happen. Or tell them why you couldn't make it happen, right? One of the biggest headaches I ever had was that I was in charge of security clearance at Treasury, and there was a big problem with DHS issuing them. And so I would push forward as hard as I can, and then when I hit a brick wall, I was like, can't go any further. Were they upset with me? Yes, they were upset with the system, not with me. And we took that all the way to the DHS secretary, and I was finally like, I don't know who else to go to. We went all the way up the chain. But they respected that, right? That I cared enough to go through the process and that they wanted to do that. So I think, you know, those are just two critical things. The other thing is all the opportunities you have, take advantage of all of them, right? I always went to every meeting I could. I always went to every event I could just to be able to learn as much as I can. My son has an internship this summer. I said, I expect you to be home 10 o'clock at night. You'll be at work at 9 o'clock the next morning, but if there's a happy hour that you're invited to, you should be going to it, right? You shouldn't be drinking, right? Or if you want to, you can, whatever. But you know, you have to be able to make sure that you're at those events to meet other people. Because at those events, those happy hours, you know, the time outside the main event, right? And the great thing about this event was how much networking time you had. And it was built in. You had to network, right? And so you had to have those discussions. So the more you can network, the more you can talk, right? Introduce yourself. Talk about what you're interested in. You're a freshman, right? You probably have no idea what you want to be when you grow up. You think you might know, but you probably don't. But through those discussions, you're going to fine-tune it. You're going to get to a spot where you're like, yeah, that's what I really like, right? And as those other things kind of fade away and the new things come up, and the intellectual curiosity here is just incredible, right? All those posters, I love those posters, right? That's stuff I would never see otherwise, but now I know what you guys are doing out here in a way in which I can't get otherwise. So just learning that stuff is going to be critical. So, and the other thing is learn about data. Data is going to be more important than anything else. And think about how to use data differently. So one thing that people don't like that I say is that, you know, in government, right, there were a lot of people who were let go who left. I think two things you got to think about, right? How much of that institutional knowledge we need to keep and how much we just need to let go. That's a fine issue to move through, but if you get stuck in the past, you never make it to the future, right? And you, as new young students coming out, have to start asking that question. Why are we doing it this way? Does it make sense? Have we thought about it from a different way, right? Take the data that's out there and think about it in different ways. Challenge the status quo in this space. Understand what you could be doing differently and try to see where you can get from that area. I think that's going to be very powerful as we have a new something on the horizon, whatever this is, and it's going to be different. So I don't know what 5 years looks like from now. I know CERIAS is still going to be around. You're going to probably have a lot about AI and other topics, but who knows what the next thing is, right, as this go forward. And, we have to keep innovating, keep thinking, go forward. So, as you're in this early stage, I think the 20s are just about spending as much time as you can to learn. Do all those kind of things. Be out there as much as you can. Learn what it is. Figure out what you want to be. And then you can worry about from the 30s on whatever you're going to do at that point. But maybe you find your dream job when you get out of here, the first job. Maybe it is later in your career. But, that inquisitiveness, being able to ask the questions, learning something different. So I know that, once again, sounds like a graduation speech. But, if you ask me, that's what I always try to do. Right? And that's what I tell my kids to do all the time. And once again, like I said yesterday, you never fail, right? You never fail. You learn, you course correct, you move forward. But there's so few times in life you really fail. I mean, maybe you could fail on the test, but you're going to learn. Everything you do gets you to the next spot, and it's not always fun. Sometimes it's painful, but you got to learn how to build through that. So, anyway, any other questions? I waxed poetically for all that time. That was great.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the wax and the poetry. Joel, Diane, do you have any closing remarks?
Unofficial closing remarks. Thank you to everybody who attended. And while we've done it a couple of times, it is worthwhile in saying that Spaff, Dong-Young, and I get a lot of credit, but it is a truly team effort. So to the entire CERIAS team, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you next year. In the interim, this talk was actually part of our weekly security seminar series. And those are held weekly during the academic year. So we're about ready to wrap up this year, but they'll start again in August. But all of these talks going back to the year 2000 are recorded and are made available on both the CERIAS website as well as our YouTube channel. And it reads like a who's who in the cybersecurity industry. We've been blessed to have some people throughout the years who were maybe young in their career and were unknown at that time, and who are near household, or at least within the cybersecurity industry, are very, very well-known people. And we've had people who have come, like Brian, who at the top of their career have come and talked. It's phenomenal database of great talks. So I would encourage you before our event again next April to take a look and view any of those talks from the last 26 years that may be of interest to you. The rest of the team, anything else we should add? Okay. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you again here in 2027.
Or before. We always like to have visitors.